Hello and welcome to this lecture. In the previous lecture, you learned how to implement a function, and in this lecture, you will be learning how to remove redundant code of your program with the help of a function, and also we will be learning about parameterized functions and functions with return values. Let's get started by opening Python's idle environment. Now the example which I will be using here is to compute the area of two rectangles. Now the formula to compute the area of a rectangle is area equals length into width. Now let me go ahead and define the variables of my first rectangle, the length and width of my first rectangle. So it is length 1, let me have it as 8 centimeter, and width 1, which I will be having as 3 centimeter. Now in order to compute the area, the formula is area 1 equals length 1 star width 1. Now on printing my area 1, I get the output as 24. Now let's compute the area of our second rectangle. Let me define two more variables, length 2 with the value 10 centimeter and width 2 with the value 4 centimeter. And my area 2 would be length 2 into width 2. Now on printing area 2, I get the result 40, which is 10 into 4. Now you do see the pattern, don't you? For every area which you need to compute, you need to write the same code over and over again, which is to compute the area. Now we will be overcoming this with the help of a function. So what I will be doing now is to create a function which will compute the area of a rectangle. Let me create a function called compute area, and it will accept two parameters, length and width. So this is how you accept parameters in a function. Within the pair of parentheses, you mention the variables which you need to accept. And within the body, I now define area equals length into width. And then I print area. Now I have my function compute area which has been defined, and this particular function can be used now for any rectangle. Now let me go ahead and implement this on my first rectangle. So to compute area of my first rectangle, now all I have to do is compute area, and within parentheses I pass my length and my width. Now what you need to note here is the variable names can be different. Now while calling a function, I pass the value length 1 which has the value 8, but while receiving it, the name need not be the same. So I have length 1 here and length here, and I have width 1 here and width here. The only thing that you need to make sure of is that the order of assignment is the same. Now in case you had changed it with passing width 1 first and then length 1, then the value will be assigned with width and then the length. So make sure that the order of passing your arguments is right. Now if I execute this function, I get the value 24, which is 8 into 3. Now similarly, I can do this operation for the second rectangle as well, length 2 and width 2. Now you do see how function has helped us reduce a lot of code in our program. Now the next type of function which we will be looking at is function with return values. Let me go ahead and redefine this function. Compute area, accepting the parameter of length and width, and I'm computing it as length into width. Now what I will be doing here is, instead of printing the area in this statement, I will be returning it back to my program. So to do that, all I have to do is use the return keyword and pass the name of the variable which has to be returned. Now let's go ahead and check how that works. Now what you need to make sure while returning a variable is that you have a variable which accepts the returned value. So in this case, I have my variable area 1 which accepts the result of the computation of area for my rectangle 1. So I pass my variables length 1 and width 1. Now the result is stored in area 1, which can be now printed, and I get the answer 24, which is 8 times 3. Similarly, I can have a variable area 2 and then call this function with my second rectangle, which is length 2 and width 2. Now on printing area 2, I get the result 40. So you learned how to write a function with parameters, and also you learned how to return values from a function. So that's the end of this lecture and this section on functions. Let's take a quick review of what we have learned in this section. So we started this section by discussing what a function is, which is a named block of reusable code that performs a specific task. And then we saw how to define a function. The syntax is to use the def keyword and then a function name followed by a pair of parentheses, and then you have a colon which says there is a block of statement that follows your function. So an example is the hello world function, which prints the statement hello world. Then what we saw was how to make a function call. Now you defined a function. In order to call the function, all you have to do is use the function name with a pair of parentheses. Then we learned how to pass arguments to functions and return value from it. Now in this example, we have two variables, number 1 and number 2. Number 1 with the value 10 and number 2 with the value 20. So we have our function find maximum, to which we pass these parameters number 1 and number 2. So to pass the parameters, all we have to do is within the parentheses mention the variable names separated by commas. And then in your function definition, you accept them in the same order. So make sure that the order in which you pass is the same. When you pass number 1 and number 2 as the parameters, receive it as number 1 and number 2. Now the names which you use can be different, but make sure that the order is the same. And what we do in our function is to check if number 1 is greater than number 2. If it is greater, we will return the greater number, which is number 1, back to our main program. Else what we will do is to return the number 2, which is greater than number 1. And in our main program, we have a variable called greater number, which will receive the number from the function, whichever is greater. So that's the end of the review on this section on functions. If you have any doubts so far, feel free to use the discussion board and I'll help you from there. In the next lecture, we will be writing a program that implements functions. I'll see you there. Thank you.